Greetings and welcome to From the Basement. On this installment we are going to take a look at BSPs. And again, I would like to do a quick reminder that these videos are meant to supplement learning the UDK, not be your primary source, because we go through these pretty quick. Alright, now before we get into BSPs, I do want to take one brief moment for a little bit of history. BSPs, or binary space partitions, was originally a computer science paper published back in the 1960s. Fast forward a few decades, and John Carmack read a more updated version of the theory and used that knowledge to create Doom. So a lot of what we do in modern first-person shooters and a lot of modern gaming relies on this little step here. So, Mr. Carmack, thank you very much, sir. Alright, with that little bit of history out of the way, let's start talking BSPs in Unreal. Now, how we construct levels in Unreal is we start off with a big void of nothing, an absolute void of nothing. And to build our level, we add in pieces of geometry and subtract out pieces of geometry to get the level shape that we want. Those are the BSP brushes. To start off with, we have this red builder brush. This brush does not actually exist. It just simply shows you where we will be adding in or subtracting out geometry. You can only ever have one builder brush. You will never have more than one of these in your scene. Our brushes that we can use are located over here. Left-clicking on a brush will build it to the last set settings that you have on it. And right-clicking will bring up properties that you can use then to define different aspects for that brush. As you can see, we can have multiple brush property windows open. Generally, I think that's a bad idea. Makes a lot of clutter, so I would not leave those open. So for now, let's take a look at how to build a simple room using individual pieces. Then we'll take a look at how to build a room very quickly using hollow pieces. So if I right-click on the cube, I will bring up the property window for my builder brush here. Let me go over here and find it. Actually, move that back over there. All right. So one thing that's immediately worth noting, I'll explain those numbers in a moment, on the UDK is the axes. Unreal is a Z up world. You can see that my Z value is 16, and if I look at my perspective, you can see that this piece here, the smallest portion, is, it looks like a floor piece. The other interesting thing about the Unreal environment is that X is on the vertical axis. So if I change this to 1024, notice now, I changed my X value, but my vertical axis is what increased. So that does take a little bit of getting used to. Okay, to start off with, we're going to build a 512 by 512 by 16 room. And let me move that over there. That's a little bit better. Now, when you build a brush, you need to make sure that you keep it snapped to the grid. If I zoom in here on my front and side views, I can see that my brush is off the grid. Anytime you build a brush, check it to make sure it's still on the grid. It likes to knock brushes off the grid when you build new brushes. If I shift right-click on one of these vertices, it will snap that vertice to the nearest available grid point. And now, with that snapped on, I can add in the geometry. To do that, I can either click on this button or do a Control-A for add. Now, before I add that in, I'm going to take a quick moment to talk about materials. I don't have the materials selected yet. I'll do materials in another video. When you add in a brush without materials selected, you will get this checkerboard pattern. Now, I actually strongly recommend keeping this checkerboard pattern when you are developing your levels, because each one of these little squares here is 64 units. And so it gives you a really convenient measuring tool when you're working on things. So with that added in, if I move my builder brush out of the way, we can see that we've got this blue brush left behind that's the same exact shape. That is our addition brush. And we'll see a subtraction brush a little bit later. So now I've got my floor. I'm going to go ahead and do my walls then. I'm going to set my X to 16, leave my Y at 512, and change my Z to 256. Oops, did not mean to grab that one. So grab my builder brush, drag it up, and actually zooming in here, yep, I'm off the grid. Snap that onto the grid, Move this down and verify. Now there's a couple of ways we can do this. One way is to have the wall piece resting on the floor. Now this will result in me not having a true 512 by 512 floor. The other way is to have it off to the edge like this. Now when you add it in, there's not, assuming that I don't have it too high up, which I do. Now when I add this in, you won't be able to see the gap right here. There won't be any gap. It'll be perfectly matched up. It doesn't really matter too much which of these two methods you use, except if you know that you're going to be looking at this shape from the outside, doing it this way is going to look a little bit weird. You want to make sure that things are resting on top. So that's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to have that on. Everything looks good. Control A, add it in. Zoom up. Move my builder brush over here, Control A, add it in. Now I can't just simply do a 512 on the X value, because if I do, I will get overlaps, and overlaps are bad. You do not want those. So instead what I will do is I will use the middle mouse button to measure, so I'll click with the middle mouse button and drag, and I can see that I need 480 units. I could also do it by knowing, okay, well, I've got 16 thick walls here, so that means I must need to subtract out 32. You can do math in these fields here. Basically any operator you can think of, you can do, which also gives me the 480. Come back in, make sure yet again that we're on the grid. Check here, everything looks good. Control A, add that in. Drag it over to the other side. Control A, add that in. Now to add in the ceiling, I'm going to grab the floor. So I'm going to look in one of my side views, grab the floor. Now if I want to duplicate anything, brush, actor, item, node, doesn't matter. Duplicate anything in the editor, if I press and hold the Alt key and drag, I will move it up. Now notice I don't see it. When you add brushes and you subtract new brushes out, Unreal will rebuild that geometry for that specific brush. However, if you duplicate or move an existing addition or subtraction brush, it will not automatically update it. You will need to come up to your toolbar and click on Build Geometry for Visible Levels to be able to see your changes. Anytime you see really weird stuff in your level, most of the time clicking on Build Geometry will fix it. So for now, I can look in here and say, yep, okay, I've got a room. Now what if I wanted to see in here? I can click on this surface in the perspective view and say Hide Selected, and now I can look in. Now it's going to look a little bit weird because you cannot see the back side of faces, so the fact that I've got a solid wall here, you know, I can see one side of the wall, I can see the other side of the wall, but if I'm looking perfectly straight down at it, it kind of looks like the walls disappear on me. That's normal, it's expected. You don't want to be able to see the back side of faces. Alright, so now we have a room. I'm going to move this builder brush out of the way a little bit, and let's duplicate this room over. So, actually first I'm going to turn Show All on. I'm going to do Alt-Control and then Marquee Select. I will do an Alt-Left Drag to duplicate out the room. I'm going to hit Rebuild so that I can see my geometry. And then I'm going to Control-Left Click to select these two surfaces. And I'm going to Hide Selected. Now I'm ready to build my doorway here. The door's going through the X direction, the vertical direction. So I'll set my X to 32. If I use, let me zoom in here, it'll be a little bit easier. If I measure, I can see that, yep, that's 32. My Y, I will set to 128. It's generally advisable to not make doorways narrower than that. For my Z value, I don't want to cut it all the way up to the ceiling. Now, I don't want to bring this in and actually slice it all the way up to the top like that. That's not going to look good. Besides which, no doorway ever really looks like that. There's always a bar there. And so I'm going to take this down by 64 units, giving me a 192. little bit narrower than the room itself, or a little bit shorter than the room itself, but fairly typical for a door. And now I'm going to go through, make sure everything's snapped. All right, get you down on the floor, drag you up over here. Oh, nice, you actually decided to stay on the grid. That looks roughly centered. So in this time, instead of doing a Control A, I'm going to do a Control S for subtract. And that is going to cut out that hole in the geometry. If I move my builder brush out of the way, you'll notice I've got a dull gold brush left behind, and if I select it, it turns bright gold. And that's how you tell it is a subtraction brush. And now I have got something I can walk through. Now if I really wanted to walk through this, I would add in a point light, and it'd add the point light onto the ceiling. It wasn't quite far enough down. So add a point light in. Drag it over. By the way, what I was just doing, if you press and hold the Shift key while dragging something, you will lock the camera onto that object. Very useful for when you need to drag things over long distances. And I'll come up to my lighting. Whenever you build lighting, it's a good idea to turn off light mask. You don't really need that until you're really trying to get a feel for what the final lighting is going to look like. Turning off light mask allows the lighting to build much faster. So now I can come in here, right-click, say play from here, and sure enough, I can walk around. There's my doorway. Feels fairly natural to go through it. And there we go. All right, so hollow brushes work largely the same way. I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to change this to 512, 512, 256, and I'm going to check hollow. And you notice it automatically builds something that looks similar to what we have. One minor difference is that it's going to be all one piece. Notice it's got the same thing. If I layer this over, it has, well, and I correct its height over here, it has, well, almost the exact same dimensions as the other room. It's 16 units shorter, because I bumped up the height a little bit for my walls. And so if I put this into position, click Build, I'm sorry, Control A to add it in. Let me make sure everything's lined up. Yes, everything's lined up. Add that in. Get my builder brush out of the way. I can just go ahead and grab this subtraction brush and drag it, Alt drag it over. Look, make sure everything still is okay. All right, rebuild my geometry. By the way, it's a very common mistake when you're coming up to rebuild geometry to say, like, maybe click on this one instead. If you do that, nothing bad happened. That just changes how it renders in this frame. Just change it back to brush wireframe and you'll be good. All right, and now I can take a quick look. And need to drag over that light so that we can actually see. Rebuild my geometry again just because I'm paranoid. Rebuild my lighting. Hurry up and wait, because it's now I've got a little bit more complicated lighting going. Oh, I forgot to turn light mask off. That's why. You can see how much longer it took that time for a light mask. Not that it really matters so much for such a small area, but more complicated levels, of course, it would make a difference. And there we go. Using the rest of the brushes is pretty much the same thing. Cone, a couple of things on the, just real quick on the other cones. Z refers to how high the cone is. Cap Z refers to if it's hollow, I believe. That's what the cap Z refers to. Outer radius refers to how wide the base is. So if I set that to a 1024 and build, it builds out. And of course I can make it hollow. Sides, I can control how many sides it has. A cylinder, pretty much the same way. The Z controls how high it is. So if I set that to 512, you can see it grows in size. Outer radius controls from center to edge. How big is it? So if I set that to 256 and build, it shrinks down. Inner radius only comes in if it is hollow. And of course your outer radius needs to be large enough to support that, so that's why it wasn't working. So there we can see my inner radius. I am off a little bit there on my measurement, but the inner radius matches this. So if I bring this down, say 256, I've got thicker walls now. Number of sides does what you would think it does. A sheet is special. We will deal with that one later. And of course a sphere, which looks nothing like a sphere at first, at least until we get some more interpolation going up. As you can see now, that does indeed look like a sphere. Spheres you cannot make hollow, at least not easily. I could make, say, a 512 sphere, add that in, and then make a 256 sphere, oops, 256, not 2056, and subtract that out. Oops, I don't think it didn't subtract out. And so now I can come in here, and sure enough, I've got a inner sphere area here inside this bigger one. And then the stairs, they're special enough, they get their own video, and this one has gone on long enough. So until then.